Hey everyone, today I want to talk about the Final Fantasy video game series and where I think it should go in the future. This is just an opinion of mine, there's no data or facts supporting it, so people may disagree with what I have to say or have different opinions, and that's perfectly fine. I also want to say that this is mostly going to focus on the MMO side, although I do have a couple things to say about the single player game series, which I'm going to start with. And the reason I don't have too much to say about the single player side is because I think they're doing the right things there. They're making a new Final Fantasy game each time, except for there's occasional sequels that they had for 10 and 13, but in general, it's a brand new game each time. Uh, Even with some of the sequels, they're making a new combat system. You're going to new areas. They're keeping it fresh. I think that they should keep doing that. Keep trying out different things. Um, some are a hit, some are a miss, and that's fine. That's just part of it. Not everything's going to be for everyone. Not everything's going to be a hit, but keep changing it up. It gives something fresh for players to learn, new characters to fall in love with, a new world to explore. It's a good choice overall. Even with the somewhat controversial action combat they introduced in 16, I was completely fine with that. I liked it. I wouldn't mind it happening again. I think there's areas that they could expand upon, but in general, I was fine with it. I don't need it to go back to a turn-based RPG. Uh, Also, speaking of 16, they took a darker approach to the story. Uh, the adult, mature themes were much heavier in 16 than they were in other Final Fantasy games, I would say. Even though, all the Final Fantasy games do have mature adult themes, it was definitely more present in 16, and I was fine with that as well. If they decide to dial it back a bit in the next Final Fantasy, I'd be okay with that. As long as the story is good, I don't care which direction they take. Just keep the story good. The one area I would like to see change with the story would be how, typically at the end of a Final Fantasy game, you have to kill a god or a godlike being, or the antagonist becomes a god, and I personally that doesn't resonate with me. I much prefer it when you're fighting other humans or human-like people, and it's just much more for me to, I guess, relate to. You can also kind of understand the antagonist, their motives, why they're doing something, and it seems like a more believable battle than fighting a god with a sword. It just doesn't seem realistic, even though it's a fantasy world. There should be limits to what magic or superpowers you kind of have. So when you're just a normal person with a sword, I don't see how you beat a god. But you do, power of friendship or whatnot. But if they just kept it to fighting regular humans, the antagonist just stays a human-like person, I'm completely fine with that. I prefer that. But I know it's been kind of a standard for Final Fantasy games to fight a god like being at the end, so I don't see them changing that, but I just wanted to say that. Alright, so switching over to the MMO side. Um, I've been a long-time player of Final Fantasy XIV. I started in Stormblood, and I've been playing, even now, I play Dawn Trail, but I'm ready for a new Final Fantasy MMO, and it doesn't have to do with Dawn Trail's story. There's been a lot of mixed reviews and different opinions on Dawn Trail. I have my own opinion, but I'm really not going to get into that in this video. I just wanted to say that I've played through it, but I've actually felt like I wanted a new Final Fantasy MMO before Dawn Trail, pretty much right after Endwalker ended. The story arc that we've been going through is completed, so to me I felt kind of done with the game. I feel like I've done everything I wanted to in Final Fantasy XIV. I've of course, experienced the story. I did the extreme trials. I did savage raids. I did ultimate raids. I've done the deep dungeons. I haven't done all of them solo, but I've gone through them at least in a party. But I don't care to try and push it solo. That's just not for me. I've done the relic grinds for um, Bajja and Eureka. I started to even do some of the old ARR and Heavensward relic grinds, but I didn't complete it. It's a bit of a grind, and I didn't find it all that interesting for just basically a glamour weapon. But I've done a lot in the game. I've messed around with housing, um, been in free companies, but I feel like I've come to experience it all. And while, Dawn Trail offers some new content, it's new content that I've already experienced just in a different color, a different flavor. So in my mind, I'm ready to move on. And I want to get into why I think moving on would be good, not only for players, but also for the developers as well. And part of that has to do with the story, and also the code of the game. But we'll start with the story. I think that, you know, when you keep creating new stories, you have to also keep following along with existing lore, existing characters, and sometimes that can create limitations because you have to make sure that you're not breaking something that has happened before. Um, and also, there's only so many crises a world can have. So when you defeat the big bad, it's like, okay, what is there going to be another big bad? Is it going to be right away? Is it going to be 10, 20 years in the future? How are things going to have changed? And they have to account for all that. And I think some of that caused issues with Dawn Trail and why it's getting the mixed reception it is, because everyone's really talking about the story. There's not really too much else besides two extreme trials to really talk about with Dawn Trail. So, it would give the writers something new to do and really show what they have to offer. And also, I would just personally appreciate seeing new characters. I feel like I've seen enough of Thancred, Urianger, Y'shtola, and I'm ready to move on. But I know some people are really attached to them. Um, but me personally, I don't mind getting to know new characters. I think that it can be a fun experience, and also it happens in life too. Like, especially for me, like you meet new people, have new friends, your friend circle changes. That can change in games. You don't have to be talking to Thancred and Y'shtola in the next, 10, 20, 30 years. I don't need to grow up and die with these characters. I'd like to see something new in my lifetime. Moving on, I think there's also a lot of technical things that could be fixed by introducing a new MMO. A lot of things that players have been complaining about in 14 for a long time could simply be fixed by having a new MMO where we're not having to build off the base spaghetti code that's constantly brought up as a reason why we can't implement these changes. Some of these things, such as a new glamour system, that's been commonly complained about by just about every 14 player. It's clear that there's just about every MMO out there is doing it better than what Final Fantasy is when it comes to glamour. They have made some changes to it. I know they've expanded upon what you can store in there, and now you can have 2 dyes for some armor pieces, but MMOs like Guild Wars 2, they've had that for a long time, and there's no limit on what you can put in your storage. You can get every single glamour, and a lot of them are also not tied to classes. I think that was something that they started off in Guild Wars 2, and then they kind of realized, hey, maybe the healer doesn't want to look like a healer. Maybe they want to look like a tank. Who cares? And they could equip like heavy armor. some of that is still there, but um, there's a lot more flexibility with what kind of armor you can equip. And there's also, in some cases in Guild Wars 2, there's 3 die options or 4 die options. And I think we could even go beyond that with a brand new MMO. We could create a whole bunch of different, like 10 different die options depending on the complexity of the piece. We could expand upon this quite a bit. So that's something that could be brought into the next Final Fantasy MMO that I really don't see changing too much currently in 14. Um, Another thing that could also be done is improving housing, not just with everyone can get a house easily, but also what you can put in the house, what you can interact with. Um, I've never been much of an RP player, I'll admit, but one thing that's kind of prevented me from getting into it is the what you can even interact with in a house. It feels very limited. You can eat, drink, sit down. Uh, you're kind of relying on emotes a lot, which helps, but I think there could be more interactions. Something that I would like to see is, maybe instead of just houses, maybe someone opens up an actual restaurant and it looks like a restaurant, and you could go in there and there's staff working there, and there's actually like a checkout system. I think things like that, would be really cool and really help with role playing and in creating an actual living world. I know some of that might be, you know, asking too much, but I think it could definitely be improved upon from what we currently have, and a new MMO can offer that. And another thing that I want to bring up for technological improvements is the reason I'm also feeling kind of bored with 14 is that the raids are getting kind of stale, which is probably the thing I like most about 14. There's only so many stack spreads that they can do, or in and out, chariot dynamo. How many times have we heard that? Just to describe an in or out, um, protean waves. We're seeing a lot of the same mechanics, just named something else. It does pretty much the exact same thing. Sometimes they do come up with something kind of clever that feels different, although at a base level, it's still usually involving the same thing. But I think a new MMO could fix that issue. It could allow them to create something entirely new that we've never seen, because players might have more options. That would mean creators have more options because they can implement different mechanics, because we have different tools to solve them. So I would look forward to that, because yeah, currently I'm not too excited for the new Savage Raid tier coming out. Kinda ultimate, but part of me doesn't want to put in the time, and then part of me is just like, I've been through it before. It's not as exciting going through, my 6th or 7th ultimate, so I feel happy where I'm at. But yeah, I think a new MMO could help bring a fresh perspective to that. Also, speaking of raids, I think with a new MMO, they could get rid of that server tick that we have in Final Fantasy, where things don't happen quite when it seems like they do, like right when the bar fills up or right when you press something. Usually there's a delay where it's happened a bit before that. So I would like to see that go away, and I think that could. And another thing, kind of speaking on raids and just Party Finder in general, is I would like to see a regional Party Finder. I know they've introduced data center travel, but the technology's there for something more regional. And we could also maybe even have like region travel as well. So if you want to play in Asia, you could, or then you could go back to North America. But yeah, having these separate party finders is kind of annoying. Data center travel somewhat fixes that, but you have to, everyone's moving to Aether to find parties when why not we just have one big party finder for all of North America that we all look up like that? I think that would be much easier. Wouldn't have to deal with data center travel at pretty much at all. Um, but they're going to need all new infrastructure and a new MMO for this to happen. Uh, who knows? Maybe they could do it with the current 14, but I think they are reaching the limits of what they can do with the base code. So that's kind of why I'm pushing for a new MMO. Personally, I know that there's plenty of people out there who are very happy with 14. They don't want it to go away. And by no means am I advocating for Final Fantasy 14 going away. In an ideal world, there would be developers for 14 and the next MMO. I know that isn't ideal. It wouldn't work out. While there might be a team supporting 14, if they were making a new MMO, they would have to dedicate a lot of resources to that, and 14 would go on the back burner. Also, players would be moving over to the new MMO, which would mean less of a population in 14. But I'm in the minority here, and also I don't see them getting rid of 14 anytime soon, especially with this graphics update. They've invested way too much resources into 14, and it's probably going to continue on for at least another 2 or 3 expansions past Dawn Trail. So I probably wouldn't expect to see a new Final Fantasy MMO until like 6 or 8 years out. But I just wanted to say this, give my opinion on it, even though I don't expect this to happen anytime soon. But this is just my preference. Anyways, thank you everyone for listening to my opinion on where I'd like the Final Fantasy series to go. I think I've kind of rambled on enough, and I've had to make several edits just because I'm losing my train of thought. So thank you for listening, and have a good rest of your day.